Zhang Henshui's The Golden Family Chapter 30. It's hard for a virtuous couple to appear in a glamorous appearance. They want to form a small family. After discussing the price of gold, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the play had begun in the large living room, and the male and female guests sat on the left and right sides to watch the play. Yanxi followed the crowd and entertained everyone. Peng Zhen deliberately passed in front of him and gave him a look. Yanxi understood and followed him to the courtyard outside. When Peng Zhen saw that no one was there, he smiled and said, "Hu Yuxian is here too, did you know? I don't know if your third sister-in-law knows the inside story or something, but she didn't order Hu Yuxian's play. Do you think? It doesn't matter if she doesn't come. If she doesn't come, how will it be a loss of face? Can you show her off? And the sooner the better." Yanxi said, "I would be guilty of doing that." A serious suspicion. Hu Yuxian is a character who appears for the first time. Once her characteristics are revealed, isn't it obvious to praise her? Peng Zhen said, "Her acting is really not bad." She smiled and said, "Whether she's good or not depends on everyone saying she's good. I won't do such a presumptuous thing, as it will bring a lot of suspicion." Peng Zhen said, "That's it. I'll ask you 3 questions. Sister-in-law, just say that someone from the male guest introduced me as a favor and wanted to give her some face." Yanxi said, "Maybe it works. Where is that person?" Peng Zhen said, "You? Why go to see her? Can't you see her when she goes on stage?" Yanxi said, with a smile, "What don't I know? She must be in the small study in front. I can't find her." "Yes." Peng Zhen said, "You go and make a deal, and I will give you a formal introduction. Isn't that enough?" Yanxi couldn't force him. When he returned to his seat, he saw that his family members were all leaving their seats under the stage. Qingqiu was at the corner door, but she kept nodding to him. Yanxi didn't know what was going on, so he walked over. "I saw that the corridor behind the hall was filled with morning chrysanthemums and sweet-scented osmanthus. Among the flowers, 3 tables of banquets were laid out in Chinese characters, and everyone in the family sat down." Yanxi smiled and said, "How come my master doesn't know that all the guests have sat down first?" Yufan said, "Are we still serious about having wine on our birthday? We can eat when we are hungry. Now we can calmly. After you eat, you can enjoy the show later. Besides, you have to entertain guests and don't have time to eat with us. Let's enjoy flowers and drink wine to celebrate your birthday. What do you think, Yanxi?" Before he could speak, he saw 2 people on the right seat nodding to him. When Yanxi looked at them, one was Miss Qiazizhen and the other was Yufan's sister Wang Qiaxia. Yanxi smiled and said, "You 2 are here too. I don't dare to disturb you." Wang Qiaxia was 1 year younger than Miley, and she and Miley were good friends. They often visited Jin's house to play, and she also called Yanxi after Miley. 7th brother, Yin said, "We have a party at home, and we have invited Brother Qi there a long time ago. Brother Qi celebrates his birthday by himself, and there is a party, but how can he hide it from us?" Yanxi smiled and said, "This is a good question, but this time I made an impromptu move. Firstly, I didn't have time to post it, and secondly, I couldn't inform you. It seems like I'm asking for a gift from you." Wang Qiaxia said, "Anyway, it's all right. Brother Qi is right." Yanxi said with a smile, "I don't understand. I don't understand. I'll be punished with 3 cups of wine." Qiazizhen said with a smile, "I don't dare to say that. Let's just give him 3 cups of wine today." He smiled and said, "That's unbearable, and I don't dare take it seriously. Let's all have a drink together." Yanxi stood, raised his glass, and invited everyone to drink. Everyone drank. Bai Shuju was very unhappy when she saw that Yanxi had done what Qiazizhen suggested. She was about to say something witty, but at this moment Jin Quan was happy and he came too. "When everyone saw me, they quickly gave up their seats." Jin Quan was naturally happy when he saw the crowd of children. Even his son-in-law Liu Shuhua was at the table, but the only one missing was the 3rd young master. Jin Quan asked, "Where's Asan? Where did he go? He's just busy." Yanxi was afraid that his father would find out the reason, so he said, "Everyone in the family is here for dinner. It's not good that there's no one to entertain. 3rd brother is entertaining guests. I'll sit down for a while, and then go and replace him." Yufan said with a smile, "He's a guest here too, so you should accompany him." Jin Quan drank and looked around. Seeing there were many flowers, he said, No wonder I smell a strong fragrance all the way inside and outside the house. There are these flowers in the house, but there are too many flowers, and the air is too thick and turbid. Not good, so the ancients said that flowers don't smell much. Who sent these flowers? They are very elegant, but they are not good at it. Pai Feng said with a smile. Qingqiu and the others know what it means. Where's Yaya? Jin Quan stroked his beard and said with a smile. Do they also give gifts? Then he turned to Yanxi and said, it's not easy for them to have a few dollars, but you accept their birthday gift. Yanxi said, that's what I said, but they had already bought it and had to accept it. Jin Quan said, you accepted gifts from others and you still want to invite people. Is this how you accept their gifts? Yanxi smiled and said, I prepared a banquet of wine for them and let them eat by themselves. Jin Quan smiled and said, things in the world are so unequal. People who send flowers are not people who appreciate flowers and drink. I hope. I see there are many empty seats here, and there are no outsiders. Let them sit down too. Xiaolon blushed after hearing this. Mrs. Jin smiled and said, your kindness is a compliment to them, but if they really want to sit up, they will simply suffer. Jin Quan looked back and saw Qingqiu standing aside, so he pointed to the table above and below him. The empty chair said, I don't believe it, just sit down and try it. When Qingqiu heard this, she lowered her head and her face turned red and purple. Not only did he not dare to sit down, he took a few steps back. Jin Quan smiled and said, aren't you happy if I liberate you? As he said this, when he saw the people at each table, they all just smiled at each other. Jin Quan thought about it. It didn't matter that some of his daughters didn't dare to let loose. There were several guests here, and it would be too disturbing to let them sit here in a proper manner. Yin stood up with a smile and said, you guys have fun, I'll go listen to the play. Yin smiled at his wife and said, this is where their young people gather, you can go too. Mrs. Jin said, it's at your own convenience. Come on, they won't hate me. Jin Quan took an orange on the plate, peeled it, and left the table. As soon as Jin Quan left, everyone burst into laughter. Yufan said, father is really happy today. He is even polite to Qingqiu and the others. Mrs. Jin said, it's true. This is not a common thing. You can just put it under here if you have a table of food. After eating, let's go to the opera. It's time for them to be anxious again. Qingqiu quickly asked the cook to start the meal. Yanxi smiled and said, don't be too lonely in such a field of flowers. Let's find something to do for fun. Heesun said with a smile, Dad hasn't gone far yet. Just be quiet. Huiqing sat with him. On a table, he smiled softly and said, you seem to have a general understanding of what you said, but when I think about it, you look down on Mom. There was a piece of banana cake left on the soy sauce plate in front of Heesun, so he used chopsticks to sandwiched it and brought it to Huiqing. He said with a smile, this is what you like to eat. I will use this as a bribe. Please don't find fault in it. Liu Shuhua was sitting on Mrs. Jin's table. He saw it from a distance. She couldn't help but pursed her lips and smiled, but said to Mrs. Jin, Aunt, I think the second brother and the second sister-in-law are very close to each other. It turns out that Liu and Jin's family are family friends, so they don't call her mother-in-law, but aunt. Originally, the word mother-in-law is not necessarily a noun, but young people always try their best to avoid it. If you have a relationship with relatives or friends, you always want to call them in that direction. It doesn't even matter at all. I would rather call you old man than mother-in-law. At that time, Mrs. Jin listened and did not agree. Everyone noticed that Heesun came to the table. Huiqing was a very generous person, and he blushed with embarrassment when he showed such behavior in such a large crowd. Heesun said to Liu Shuhua, what happened again that you saw and wanted you to announce it in public like this? Liu Shuhua said, it's a good thing to say that you two have a good relationship. Are you going to say that the second brother and the second sister-in-law don't have a good relationship? You listen. Does it matter? My aunt is here. Let's talk about this. If I am wrong, I will accept the punishment. Where is the second brother and second sister-in-law? The blush on Huiqing's face has subsided, and then he said with a smile, I didn't say anything. Don't blame me. Mrs. Jin said, originally, young couples should have a good relationship before they can work together to do something. At this point, I will say something about Fengju. Even though there are a few guests here, we are still like a family. I don't mind spreading the family scandal. Why have you been hiding from Paifeng all week? Fengju was questioned by his mother in person. He couldn't say anything, but Paifeng turned his head away, unwilling to look at Fengju. Aunt Kui smiled and said, "Look, he and his wife are acting in a movie again. That's it. Let me persuade you to make peace. Normally, the middleman has to pay for the peace and prepare a banquet. My attempt to persuade you to make peace is not easy. It's cheap, and the banquets are all ready." Paifeng and Aunt Kui were at the table. Seeing Aunt Kui laughing, she said in a low voice, "Don't make trouble, there are guests here." Aunt Kui said to Fengju, "Master, come and sit here. I still have an empty seat." Fengju said with a smile, "You are sitting well, why do you want to lose your seat?" Aunt Kui said, "There are many people at your table, but there are few people at my table. Even it out." As he said this, he locked eyes with Miley on Fengju's table, meaning to ask her to drag Fengju over. Fengju smiled and said, "I'm full, so there's no need to move my seat. I'm going to listen to the show." Before he finished speaking, he had already stood up and left the table. Mrs. Jin was very dissatisfied with Fengju's move, but she shook her head at his silhouette. Yanxi was afraid that this incident would cause everyone to break up unhappy, so he quickly said to Liu Shuhua, "Let's just have a few punches." Liu Shuhua also knew his intention, so he started shouting across the table with Yanxi. Although this matter was involved at the moment, Paifeng thought that there were still a few strangers present, so Fengju moved away, not caring about his face at all, and felt very sad. After the party, everyone went to the theater. Yufan walked in front, but Yanxi followed behind and tugged at Yufan's clothes. Yufan looked back and said with a smile, "What's going on again? You're so sneaky." Yanxi said with a smile, "A few friends introduced a Qingqiu to sing in an opera. Can the third sister-in-law give her a face? Characteristics, as soon as she comes out." Yufan said, "Do you really think of me as a dramatist? Just ask her to sing. Why bother asking me?" Yanxi said with a smile, "It doesn't matter if you don't say that. It's a bit inappropriate to ask Hua Yuxian to sing out of thin air without telling you." Yufan said, "What? Is this person called Hua Yuxian?" Yanxi said, "Yes, he came from the south not long ago. She's here, but she hasn't been seen in the north, so sister-in-law wouldn't recognize her." Yufan said, "But her name sounds familiar to me, and I've seen her photo somewhere." Yanxi said, "No, absolutely not." Yufan looked at Yanxi's face with a smile, and then said, "Why are you so sure? Say, there might be something wrong with this." Yanxi said, "I know what sister-in-law is saying is not easy to say, isn't it? If you speak with your heart, you have to be suspicious. If you don't speak with your heart, you have to be suspicious." Yufan said, "You." She kept her head hidden, and said I was suspicious. Yanxi smiled and said, "Maybe her photo was published in some magazine and you saw it." Yufan said, "It doesn't matter if you see it or not. I just want to ask you. I don't want to interfere with any of your damn things. I want to see what this kid is good at. Just to save face, the drama must be moved back." Yufan said, "I'll give you full authority to put her drama wherever you want. Isn't that enough?" He said, "Thank you, thank you. I'll ask someone to tell her later and ask her to work harder." After saying that, he left with a smile. If he didn't say this, Yufan would rewind the story. As soon as she heard that Hua Yuxian could be called to work extra hard, she must be an acquaintance, so she became suspicious again. I deliberately sat and listened to the play for a while, then walked around the road to the backstage. Yufan only slightly pushed the door open a little and looked in, only to see that except for the painted faces of the Kunlings inside, all the others had their faces flushed with rouge. There were 3 or 4 young men in colorful clothes chatting and joking with Kunling. Another group of Kunlings were talking around Fengju and Heesun. If the eldest brother is older and the second younger brother is younger, there will be no trouble. But if you look carefully, Peng Zhen is nowhere to be seen. Yufan felt very strange. Why didn't he come to a place like this? Since there was a man here, it was inconvenient for me to go in, so I turned around and went back to the front to listen to the play. It wasn't until Hua Yuxian was about to come on stage that Peng Zhen sat down to listen to the play. Yufan glanced at him from afar, but Peng Zhen just smiled. Peng Zhen didn't dare to applaud because Yufan was looking so hard. It was already 1 o'clock in the evening when Hua Yuxian's Yutonkan was finished. After 2 more plays, the play was over and all the male guests had dispersed. Yufan thought that it was time to go on stage and act. She looked at the people present and found that besides her family, there were still some relatives. It was unexpected for her to go on stage and sing and dance with these people. So suddenly, she had an indescribable strange feeling, and she felt shy again. She felt timid, and the courage she had in the bet before was completely lost. At this time, while no one was paying attention, she quietly went to her room. She thought, I will quietly go into the room and close the door. No matter how you shout, I will not open the door, and you have no way to stop me. A person was thinking silently here, and suddenly a hand stretched out from the dark place and grabbed Yufan's clothes. Yufan was caught off guard and cried out, and when she turned around, it was Shuju. Yufan patted her chest and said, "You little thing, you really scared me." Shuju laughed and said, "I was keeping an eye on you, afraid that you would run away." Sure enough, my yin-yang bagua predicted it correctly. You can't run away. You have to put on a show for me. Otherwise, I will yell, and many people will come to see you, and you will lose face. Yufan laughed and said, I can eat well in front of you. Why should I run? I want to get something from the house. Shuju said, What do you want? You can tell me and someone will get it for you. Yufan said, I want to open the box. Shuju said, Don't talk nonsense. It's the middle of the night now. What are you going to open the box for? As she spoke, she dragged Yufan away. Yufan couldn't run away. She laughed and said, Don't pull me, I'll go. Just as she was talking, Huiqing and Miley led a large group of people and caught up. Shuju laughed and said, Hurry up and help her, she's going to run away. Everyone surrounded Yufan and came to the front without giving her time to talk. After walking to the backstage, Peng Zhen was washing his face and preparing to act. He smiled and said, Good man, don't run away at the last minute. Yufan smiled and said, Why should I run away? Am I going to leave you hanging? After saying that, he took advantage of the momentum and asked, Are your things ready? Peng Zhen said, Everything is ready. Go comb your hair first. Everyone saw that Yufan was going to act, and there was a bang. Yufan smiled and said, Don't make a fuss. The guests haven't left yet. If you call them back, I won't go on stage. Everyone was afraid that Yufan would not act, so they said whatever she said and quietly left. Peng Zhen acted first, put on his clothes, held a beard in his hand, and held a cigarette in his mouth and paced backstage. After a while, he went around Yufan several times. After Yufan combed her hair, the film was already pasted, and she was putting on jewelry in front of the mirror. Yufan smiled at herself in the mirror and said, Go over there. I don't want you here. Peng Zhen said with a smile, Boss Wang, I'm not that good at it. Let's rehearse the lyrics first. Yufan said with a smile, Go over there. We have to rehearse the lyrics for the familiar Wu Jiao Po. What's the point of watching a show? Peng Zhen said, I'm just being cautious. It's okay if you can't rehearse the lyrics. You can forget the lyrics later and then rehearse them. It's like 3 legs, one by one. Yufan turned around and shook her hands repeatedly, saying, Enough, enough. Don't mention it. I understand all the jargon you mentioned. If I can't do this, I won't go on stage. In fact, my qualifications as an amateur may be older than yours. Peng Zhen said, Okay, that's it. So he sat at the stage door and waited quietly. Yufan put on her clothes, and the scene was already set. Peng Zhen was so absorbed in watching Yufan that the huqin outside started playing the reverse beat, which was quite long. Yufan stamped her feet and said, Oh, hurry up and sing. Peng Zhen heard this and quickly put on his mask. He didn't even hold the door curtain, and sang a sentence in a daze. A horse left Ziliang. Peng Zhen calmed down and then walked out of the stage. It was fine for their brothers and sisters to see him. Only the male and female servants looked at him with a smile, as if it was a strange news. Peng Zhen lifted the curtain and walked out of the stage to finish singing, and then said a few more lines. Yufan only sang a reverse beat on the stage, and the audience had already applauded loudly to express their welcome. As soon as the curtain was lifted, Yufan rushed out of the stage, and the lights came on again, dazzling. Mrs. Jin was also happy. She sat at the entrance of the stage and watched Peng Zhen come out first, and she was already very happy. At this time, he quickly put on his reading glasses and smiled at the second concubine beside him. This young couple is really a pair of freaks. Look at Yufan. She looks even prettier in her costume. I think if there really was a Wang Beiachuan back then, she would be just as pretty as this, right? Yufan was on the stage, her eyes darted around, and she saw that everyone in the audience was smiling with narrowed eyes, so she didn't dare to look down. After Yufan finished singing this part, she knelt on the stage and pretended to pick vegetables. It was Zhu Pinggui's turn to sing again. Pengzhen was joking on purpose and changed the tune. He sang, "This eldest sister-in-law is too slow in delivering messages. My legs hurt from standing in front of Wujia slope. I looked carefully after I got down the slope and saw an eldest sister-in-law kneeling on the dusty ground. The one in front looked like their third sister, Wang, and the one behind looked like my wife, Wang Yufan." He only sang to this point, and everyone on and off the stage had already burst into laughter. It turned out that Yanxi and Miley, sometimes called Yufan third sister. Now, Pengzhen's change of tune was just a coincidence. How could everyone not laugh? Yufan had been unable to hold back her laughter when she came on stage, but when Pengzhen made a joke, she bit her tongue with all her strength to hold back her laughter, and finally managed to hold it back. Pengzhen had already said, "Sister-in-law is here to pay her respects." Thinking about this, Yufan hurriedly stood up, and in a moment of panic, she forgot the words, "Returning courtesy, has the general lost his way?" Pengzhen saw her standing there in a daze, so he quietly told her, and Yufan suddenly realized and hurriedly read on, but the people in the audience burst into laughter again. Later, when Pengzhen said, "If I had the heart, I would not have lost your letter," he would have patted Wang Beiachuan as usual. At this time, Pengzhen really patted Yufan on the shoulder. Yufan thought he was joking, so she flicked her sleeves and threw them hard. Unfortunately, the rhinestones on her sleeves caught her beard, and this pulled the beard down and over her lower lip, revealing Pengzhen's mouth. Fengju was also sitting in front of the stage, and he smiled at his mother. "What a nonsense. You deserve to be beaten." This time, the laughter started again. The two on the stage pulled at each other for a while, and finally tore off their sleeves and beards. They couldn't remember what to sing, and just stood there in a daze. Yufan hurriedly said, "I quit. I quit." Then she turned around and left the stage. This made everyone laugh. Mrs. Jin took off her old glasses, smiled, and took out her handkerchief to wipe her tears. Pengzhen on the stage saw Yufan running to the back of the stage, waving the horsewhip in her hand, so he chased after her, pulled her clothes, and laughed, "It's endless. You can't leave. You can't leave." At this time, not only did Yufan not know where she was, but the people on the scene also laughed so hard that they fell to the ground, and the gongs, drums, and strings were all out of tune. The more this happened, the more the people in the audience made a fuss. Miley laughed so hard that she grabbed Wang Zhaoxia and stomped her feet on the ground. The two of them leaned on each other and hugged each other. Paifeng leaned over the back of the chair, her shoulders shaking with laughter, and she kept shouting, "Ouch!" Heesun sat on the side, clapping his hands. At this time, the stage and the audience were in chaos, and no one could maintain order. Mrs. Jin put away her old glasses, pointed at the stage and laughed, "Don't make a fuss, there are guests." With that, she got up and left first. The people in the family also dispersed. Yanxi saw that there were still many distinguished guests who had not left, so he walked out with a smile and invited everyone to rest in the small living room at the back. Fengju followed Mrs. Jin and walked out quietly. Mrs. Jin walked, laughing all the way, saying, "Miley always wanted to watch the comedy, and I think this comedy is more interesting than any other play." This is all Pengzhen's trouble. He was singing well, but he suddenly started to make jokes. Mrs. Jin was talking to herself, and suddenly she heard a chuckle from behind. When Mrs. Jin looked back, it was Miley who followed behind her. Fengju had disappeared long ago. Miley smiled and said, "I'm always silent. Let's see how long you can talk by yourself." Mrs. Jin asked, "Did he slip away again?" Miley said, "He left just after he left the hall. I wanted to ask him where he was going, but he just shook his hand at me. What else could I say?" Mrs. Jin just shook her head when she heard this. When she returned to the house, she asked her mother to go to the gatehouse to ask if the master had left. When the old maid arrived at the gate, Fengju had just told the gatehouse to open the gate, and he didn't drive out, but just left. It turned out that at this time, Fengju and Wanzhong's feelings had become several times more passionate. They had already booked rooms at the Green Safra Hotel and built a sweet nest. Fengju disliked riding in a car to travel, and the driver knew the inside story. There were many servants in the family, and once they told each other, the matter was no longer a secret. So every day when he went from home to the Green Safra Hotel, he would hire a car on the street. That night, because it was late, he didn't want to go, so he secretly went to the living room outside and called Wan Shang, saying that he didn't plan to come tonight. Wang Xiang continued on the phone. No, I'm still waiting for you. Feng Zhu said, it's too late. I'm afraid I can't hire a car on the street. Wang Xiang said, no, I can't walk on the street. There are cars for hire in the middle of the night. Even if I can't hire a car, it doesn't matter if I walk. Anyway, you are walking alone, and the patrol on the street can't take you. Come on, I'll use the liquor stove here to make porridge for you to drink. Feng Zhu thought, if I don't go, she may have to wait until dawn, so she agreed to go. After hanging up the phone, I asked the doorman to open the door and go out. The old woman chased after me and just called me master from behind, but Feng Zhu pretended not to hear me and walked out of the door. After walking a long way, I met a car on the street that didn't charge at night, and I didn't bargain for the price. I stopped it and got in, and said to the driver, hurry up, I'll give you more money. The driver said, sir, where are you going? You asked me to hurry up. Where are you going? Feng Zhu thought, I was too anxious. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. How could I ask him to hurry up? Then she smiled and told him that they were going to the Green Safra Hotel. The rickshaw driver had been greedy for money and ran as fast as he could, but he still stumbled every 3 steps and every 2 steps. Feng Zhu sat on the rickshaw, feeling extremely anxious and uncomfortable, even more tired than the rickshaw driver. After pulling for a long time, he finally pulled the rickshaw to the destination. When the lights at the hotel door came on, it turned out that the rickshaw driver was an old man. Feng Zhu was very angry and wanted to scold the rickshaw driver. But when he saw his pale beard, which was covered with snot, and the sweat on his head was still dripping down, seeing such a situation, there was really nothing to say, so he threw 2 dimes to him and went into the hotel. He wanted to see what Wang Xiang was doing, so he didn't knock on the door first. He tried to push the door. The door was not locked yet, but was ajar. He pushed the door and walked in slowly. He saw Wang Xiang sitting on a big sofa, facing the table. On the table, there was a green fire from the liquor stove, which was roaring upwards. On the fire sat a small tin pot, and she was cooking porridge. When he looked at Wang Xiang, her eyes were slightly closed, and there was a slight snorting sound. So he took out her small silk handkerchief from the button under Wang Xiang's ribs and gently brushed it on the tip of her nose twice. Wang Xiang rubbed her nose with her hands and opened her eyes to wake up. When she saw Feng Zhu standing in front of her, she couldn't help stretching, stood up with a smile and said, you walked in without saying a word, and scared me. Feng Zhu said, what are you talking about? You fell asleep while sitting here. The fire in the stove is so big. Once the porridge is boiled dry, the house will be burned down. I don't think you will know. Wang Xiang also said, what are you talking about? You made people wait for a long time, and now you called and said you couldn't come. Feng Zhu said, put yourself in my shoes and think about it. Would you be willing to run alone on the street at this late night? Wang Xiang said, it's not easy to walk late at night. Why didn't you come earlier? Feng Zhu said, the whole family is still together. How can I leave early? Wang Xiang curled her lips and said, what does family have to do with each other? You are just afraid of one person. At 12 o'clock, my mother left. I sat here alone, feeling so lonely. There are only 2 rooms in Gilabodui, and it is not easy to hire a maid. If you don't come, my mother will be left alone. Feng Zhu smiled and said, it's not my fault. It's just that your mother's words are hard to say. If your mother didn't make a fuss, I would have rented a house long ago. Wang Xiang said, the conditions she proposed are not too heavy. Why don't you answer a word? Feng Zhu said, everything else is fine, but I can't agree to follow you. She is indeed your biological mother. I can't say that. I must be a creditor. How can I often interact with her? Wang Xiang turned off the fire wine stove at this time, found the bowls and chopsticks she brought in from the drawer of the table, and put porridge on the table. Then she took out 4 dishes from the table. 1 dish of sweet and sour mixed with salty snow red, 1 dish of shrimp meat mixed with celery, 1 dish of dried peach kernels, and 1 dish of raw Sichuan pickled cabbage with a few strands of red pepper on top. Feng Zhu smiled and said, it's very clean. Why are all the dishes vegetarian? Wan Shang said, didn't you eat shark fin and bird's nest at home? Your stomach is full of grease. Do you still want to eat meat? You should know that only after eating a lot of meat, Eating vegetarian dishes will taste good. Besides, there are diced ham in this porridge. How can you want meat? Fengju smiled and said, "You are very capable. If I marry you in the future, you will definitely be the head of the family. But I, the surname Jin, may not have this blessing." Wansheng curled her lips and said, "Why are you insulting me? I am serving you day and night now. Do you want to? It's all up to you." Fengju smiled and sat down to eat porridge. Wansheng sat down across the table from Fengju, but she only drank a mouthful of porridge and slowly picked up peach kernels to eat. Fengju said, "Think about it. Is what I just said wrong?" Wansheng said, "If you don't say it, I wouldn't dare to mention it, lest you say that I force you to drink rice soup, and she has long said behind your back that we are of the same mind." Fengju smiled and said, "Is that true? That's easier to deal with. As long as you are willing to cooperate with me, it will be easy to deal with her. To be honest with you, if you throw her away, how much do you think it will cost?" As she said this, she had just finished a bowl of porridge. Wansheng stood up, raised her bowl, and said, "I don't want to eat much. I'll share it with you." So Fengju handed over the empty bowl, and Wansheng used chopsticks to pick up the porridge and gave most of it to Fengju. Fengju was just about to pick up his chopsticks to eat, when Wansheng laughed and said, "I deserve to be beaten. I forgot how to share the remaining porridge with you. Turn it over, and I'll serve it to you." Fengju tapped her with the tip of his chopsticks and laughed. "You are so hypocritical." Wansheng said, "What do you mean by hypocritical? Don't you think it's dirty?" Fengju said, "Let's not talk about this. You should answer my question. How much money does she want to break off relations with us?" Wansheng said, "It's hard for me to say this. If I say too much, it will seem like I am talking to her. If I say too little, it will seem like I am talking to her. I can't do it." Fengju nodded and said with a smile, "Don't listen to the following article. This hat is good." Wansheng said, "Look, you doubt me first, don't you?" "I haven't said it yet. You don't believe it." Fengju said, "It's not that I don't believe it. You just said it. Don't worry about the amount. Just say the amount you want to say in your heart, and let me think about it." Wansheng smiled and said, "What I want to say? I think you have to give at least 3,000 yuan." Fengju put. She stuck out her tongue and said, "Do you want all these? Calculate for me. How much has she spent from me in total? Add another 3,000, and we have to rent a house, buy furniture, and buy clothes for you. I'm afraid 10,000 is too much." Wang Xiang smiled and said, "Do you still care? You are a young master, and you are an official. Spending 10 or 20,000 to marry someone is nothing." Fengju smiled and said, "You make me sound so rich. If I marry 3 or 4 people, wouldn't it cost 40 or 50,000? That would be terrible." Wangxing's eyes rolled around and said, "What? You still think it's not enough?" Fengju smiled and said, "I don't know about women's psychology, but as for men's psychology, I think men are never satisfied." Wang Xiang smiled and said, "How can you say such cruel words? If that's the case, would women still trust men?" Fengju smiled and said, "Men are all unreliable. Let me make it clear first, including me, you have to be careful." Wang Xiang said, "It's late. Stop talking nonsense. Go to sleep. Otherwise you won't be able to get up tomorrow." As she spoke, she squinted her eyes and smiled at Fengju. With this smile, Fengju was hypnotized. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.